Okay, so thank you both for letting me ask you questions about your amazing book, Yoga in the Black Community. I really wanted to know how it got started. How'd you come up with the idea that you wanted to do the book and that it became a reality?
You want me to start?
Sure, sure.
Okay. So Kimberly, thank you for that question. Marilyn and I were attending the National Institutes of Health's national, at that point, they were the National Center for Complementary and Alternative Medicine. I think now they have an integrative medicine in their title. Their 20th anniversary, I believe it was. And so they had a symposium on pain. And Marilyn and I attended that symposium. And during the symposium, we heard all of this incredible research about the use of alternative and integrative modalities to support various types of chronic pain. And even though all of this incredible research was going on, Black folks were missing from the research. Not only that, when they were giving the statistics about people and demographics suffering from chronic pain, Black folks were on the bottom of that list. We were, we had the highest incidence of of chronic illness, the highest incidence of pain, the chronic pain issues, and yet even through all of that, we were not a part of the research and not participating in any of the integrative modalities that could support us. So Marilyn and I said, well, this is a common story that we've been hearing over and over again, just being healers in this healthcare community. What are we going to do about it? Are we going to just say, what was me, or do something about it? And so that's what started us on the quest of finding different ways to we just started the research on, okay, what are some of these integrative health modalities, in particular yoga, because that's what we both have in common, and what's happening in our community to sort of support that. So that sort of was the impetus in getting us started to write the book.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And yes, and to add to what Charlene just shared with us, yoga was our commonality between the two. So we started even thinking about yoga. How is this practice also supporting our community? And having both of us been involved in yoga teacher training, we recognized then too that there was something missing. Having heard comments from Black yoga teacher trainees, having seen evidence of, after having completed the training, that there was still an interest and a thirst for learning things that they wish that they had. And so in a combination of, here's what's missing with research, we started looking at pain, and the circle got bigger and bigger and bigger, and yoga. And so we just traversed from there. It was a journey of discovery for both of us, as we tried to encapsulate everything that's going on, which was challenging to do.
So I'm going to take what you both said and something that Charlene told me when I had read the book. I wasn't consciously paying attention to how much of the book is dedicated to yoga teachers. I was thinking how amazing, the community needs this. But Charlene was like, no, we want this to reach yoga teachers. So what was the thought around that? What do you think is missing in the training that your book offers?
Well, I would say there's a cultural competency that we're hoping that the book offers. So what does that mean? So in most yoga teacher trainings, if they are registered with the Yoga Alliance, there are specific competencies that have to be covered within that, which is all fine and good. However, the practical application of those competencies within different demographics, i.e. the Black community, is missing. So we, in my own experience in teaching yoga teacher trainings, when there are Black yoga teachers in training, there's a disconnect. And the disconnect is, how does this practice resonate with me and my community? How do I adapt it so that it reaches my community? Or do I need to practice in a certain way? Do I need to find a certain lineage that might not have anything to do with our culture? Mm-hmm. And so what Marilyn and I explore in the book is that the principles and practices of yoga philosophy is aligned with the principles and practices of spirituality within our own Black community. And so the importance of showing that alignment so that yoga becomes a relevant practice that can be explored within our own community.
For me, the most powerful example of that is the table that you have on page 98, where you list yoga principles, Christianity, Kwanzaa, and Islam. To me, just the visual of that, along with the explanation around it, like that brought it home to me clearly in a way that I've never even been able to break it down before. And so I definitely think that table, all the information in the book, but that table kind of zeroes you in on, these are the things that are similar. And then some of your discussion talks about how it's different. But how did you come to pull together that table? Like, I'm just so impressed with that. It's just so clear. And so it's stuff you know from all over the place, but then it's just like right then, it's just like, oh yeah, that makes so much sense.
Well, I think Marilyn and I really spend a lot of time in conversation and research on what is a universal practice of yoga? What does that mean? And also that historically, even though yoga is associated with South Asian religions, it's not a religious practice. It is a philosophy and a way of life for a particular way of life. And so when you dig deeper and see that that way of life is really holds the universal principles that are adaptive to other ways of life, like the ones that we outlined in that particular chart, then we can show the universality of it. And we chose Christianity, Islam, and Kwanzaa because those are three pretty foundational practices that are well known within our community. Anything else, Marilyn, to that end?
Well, I also wanted to add, tie in what I'm about to say in with the previous question, Kimberly, also. Part of our discovery from writing this book and directing it toward yoga teacher trainees, and to the point where there is this cultural disconnect in the training, it was also worthwhile to describe who we are innately as a people. And being able to be in a place where you can be yourself, recognize who you are, and then apply these practices based on your community, your lived experience, was really important to us.
And I think you guys do that masterfully. I want to hold that piece. I want to come back to it, but I want to stick with the teacher training since my mind went there. I sat in on one of the book signings, and I'm assuming she was a yoga teacher who was not Black, asked the question, essentially, what am I supposed to do with this information? And so I'm wondering if you are getting that from yoga teachers who, if it's not a part of the yoga teacher training, it's not there for anybody. And so, yes, this speaks to people from the Black community, but what about yoga teachers who are picking up your book who aren't Black, but want to incorporate some of this information? What is your advice? What are you telling, when you get that question, how are you answering it?
Well, we've had some of the comments that I'm aware of. One particular person stated that the book provided information question and answers to questions that she had but didn't feel comfortable asking. So it was an opportunity of discovery for this particular person. Another individual stated that, as a yoga teacher now, I know that it resonates in the Black community to talk about spirituality because it's important in the Black community. And then again, I hope too that those that are not in the Black community learn more about us so that, and I don't know that this is the case, like I haven't done any research on this, but I just kind of know that this might come up, that we laugh, we enjoy life, we live life fully. I mean, it is part of us. And so when you see us living life fully, it's not anything to be concerned about or worried about or frightened about. That it's okay and that it is who we are. So it's a cultural primer as well, I think.
Yeah, I've actually have had folks in other communities acknowledge that the book is helping them to understand the trauma that Black students or Black yoga teachers and trainings are trying to articulate when they're in those spaces. And sometimes the articulation of that comes out in a reaction to what's being said or done within a yoga teacher practice. And so I'm having more folks reach out to me to say, thank you, because I didn't understand when Black folks are saying that they're triggered or traumatized, why that's so. And that reading our book is helpful in that respect.
On stay one more question about the part in the back of the book that's for yoga teachers, because these are the things that stood out to me when I read the book. The way that you have your models dressed to me is very modest. I've seen I don't know how to say it, yoga videos, yoga teachers doing yoga, where they're like almost in a leotard, almost bare skin. They're doing poses where, to me, bending forward and videotaping their backside and down dog and all that. To me, your examples and your poses were very modest. I want to say appropriate, but that's a judgment. But did you make a decision to do that? Or was there, what was the reason behind the decision of how your models are dressed and how you videotape them in the pose? Have you taken pictures of them in the poses?
Well, the dress was to find a way to, again, so because the models are various ages and sizes, how could we respectfully present them and to our audience so that everyone could see it didn't matter what age or size you were, yoga was appropriate. So that was that was primarily the reason, was really to find a way to respectfully show that it doesn't matter what age, size, ability that you're at, you can practice yoga. These were everyday Black folks practicing yoga, okay?
Yeah.
And now as for the way that they were photographs, we had a professional photographer who just, it was two of them who really set the stage for that. They, of course, Marilyn and I were sort of guiding the process, but they made a point of assuring that we got the best images possible to show the asana in its full expression.
And it was important to show that it wasn't about the clothes.
Right.
You could wear anything. Yeah.
Okay. I took you guys, I don't know why the end of the book caught my attention, because when I was reading, I wasn't paying attention, but when I flip back through, it's like, oh, there's a significant amount of the book dedicated to how to teach yoga. And I wanted to make sure to highlight that. It's not just, there's a lot of information for the yoga community, and I think that comes out a lot when you do your book signings, but there was an intention to make this something useful for yoga teachers too.
And practitioners. So that, yeah, so that the final section of the book, as you can see in the description of how you practice, there were a variety of different ways that you could practice, so that if if you read the book, and we try to articulate that through images, that as a practitioner, you should be able to find a way that you can begin exploring your yoga practice.
Mm-hmm. And that's really a good point that you bring up too, Kimberly, because in all of the book discussions I've been in so far, like, we never get to that part of the book.
Mm-hmm.
We've always run out of time. And I can't think of one time where we've actually engaged with the audience about what's in that portion of the book. And it is a substantial amount of the book.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So I'm gonna go back to the beginning, because that's where you had me hooked. I was in it. It was information I thought I knew. You gave me more detail. You connected the dots. And so you spend a lot of time at the book signings that I've seen talking about health, just health in the Black community. How did you decide that that was going to be kind of the starting point for your discussion when you're meeting with a group?
It is sort of like the elephant in the room. I mean, we are sick. You know that phrase, we're sick and tired of being sick and tired. And it is visible in so many different conditions. And as we did our research, we also want to acknowledge that it is not hopeless. Like, we can do things to help heal ourselves. And so it was important for each condition that we talked about, we also linked back to, in addition to working with your healthcare practitioner, here are some things that you can do. So if you watch how you breathe a certain way, then there's ways that you can calm your nervous system down and you can breathe easier. So it was a common thread throughout the book, was that everything is accessible through thought, through action, all of that.
And I also think it's important for our community that we acknowledge the challenges that we're having, specifically around our health. It's sort of this quiet taboo that we have, right? So it's not an outward conversation. It happens within families, it might happen in communities. There's always these health education efforts to have to have these outward conversations around it. But we know within our community that there is a perception that we have to be, and this has been since enslavement, that we have to be strong and silent and steadfast, right, in whatever we're doing. And so we wanted to open up that conversation and go, no, you know what? We've got issues happening here, and we need to acknowledge them. And there are ways that we can incorporate self-care that can support us. So I think that was also an important aspect of why we spent so much time in that conversation, because when we're walking into a yoga studio, regardless of what your race, ethnicity is, or social economic status, most of us walk into a yoga studio not well. We're seeking something, some way to enhance our well-being. And for us as Black folks, our well-being, the issues in our well-being are pretty deep and steep.
And we also tried to identify, we didn't skip the part about how we got to where we are. Mm-hmm. It's how we got there. Here's where we are. And here's some things that you can do to take care of yourself. So we tried to cover a full spectrum of it.
I like that you cover the fact that we're sick and you give detailed information of why you're saying that. I like that you talk about how we got there. What I also like that you talk about and you emphasize, and I want to broaden this and bring this out, we do as a people have a lot of healthy behaviors. Our diet at one point was very healthy. There are things that we do as a normal part of our cultural practices that were good for us that we stopped doing because somebody told us it was wrong.
Mhm.
Or it was different from what mainstream was doing, and so we hid those, or we thought that they were less than. How can we develop confidence in what we inherently know how to do and make that be a positive thing? It's not that eating collard greens was wrong, it was the fat back that we cooked it in that was causing the problem. And so please don't stop eating collard greens. Please don't stop eating beans. Please don't stop the healthy things that we were doing that was a normal part of our culture. How are you bringing that forward in these discussions?
It's telling the history of our existence here and the resilience that that kept us going, right? So I strongly believe that to go back to those initial practices that we had that kept us healthy will also stimulate and augment our memories towards that innate practices that we have within us. And so part of that whole conversation is that these are some practices that we intuitively knew. So can we respark those and go back to them? And it doesn't take much of a practice. It's just really it's sort of like sparking that remembrance. Meditation is a wonderful practice for that, because when we begin to still ourselves and be quiet, still the chatter of the mind, then the natural innate remembrances begin to reemerge within us, and we feel more confident in acting on those innate principles. So I think that what yoga does for us, not just the practice of asana, where we're just moving our physical bodies, but all of the practices. So definitely meditation, increasing our concentration, finding ways that we are serving the community, all of those different practices begins to reinvigorate the innate confidence that we have to follow what we know to be true.
I love that, Charlene. The last book signing I watched you offer, you broke it down to like the walnut and how that looks like the brain, and how apples, I think, and tomatoes look like the heart. I was like, oh, Charlene, it's just kind of like, this is stuff we already know.
Right.
We just haven't thought about it or how to apply it to our health.
Yes, indeed. Indeed. Marilyn, anything more for that?
Well, what I was thinking about too is that in some cases we have to be reminded. And we also have to acknowledge that not everybody knows this information too.
Right.
That it can be completely new to them. I mean, not understanding how everybody has been, brought up. But with the issue of the collard greens, to know, oh, they are healthy for me, but I need to maybe tweak how I prepare them. Yeah. But if you've been raised on McDonald's, then you've probably not had the collard greens. So part of it is reminder and part of it is education, even for ourselves.
I didn't think about that, but you're right. If you've never, I assume that like your grand or your great grandmother might have cooked something and you're like, that's old fashioned, I don't want that anymore. But if you've never even been introduced, that's a whole nother issue.
I remember doing a cooking demonstration, and it was older folks, older women, and I usually would make the guacamole as part of the demonstration. I didn't have time because the avocados weren't ripe. So I bought the avocados and I bought some guacamole, and I said that, sorry, the avocados were not ripe, so I had to purchase the guacamole, and I explained how it was made. And I had two women, two women my age or older come to me and say, how do you know that the avocados are not ripe? How do you know how to purchase vegetables, fresh vegetables?
Yeah.
And so I was sort of taken aback, but then I was like, okay, don't take it for granted, because this is something that I know that is common knowledge. Even though these women were my age or older, they were not accustomed to purchasing and cooking fresh vegetables. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
For whatever
For
reason.
whatever reason.
Not having access to fresh
Right.
fruits and vegetables, or just being busy. I mean,
Right.
we don't know, but yes, I mean, not everybody gets the fresh fruits and vegetables things. And we talk about, walking out in nature.
Right.
Not everybody has access to that, nor does everybody want to do it.
Right.
Like, there's things in the woods, don't want to go in there.
Right. And however, there's such a wide spectrum of ways that we can have self-care. Whether you are in an urban setting versus a rural setting. And so it really is a matter of, having the yoga practice of Svidhyaya, where you are studying yourself, gaining an understanding of yourself and where you are in this place and time. What is your purpose for being here on the planet, and where that journey takes you to? That's yoga.
Yeah.
And it is quite easy to say, listen to yourself, start to tune into your intuition. But each one of those statements I just made can be extremely difficult to access.
Yeah.
If you've never had the opportunity to, like, who am I? Those basic questions. And as we talk, sometimes it's easy to see this very fluid line between yoga teacher and their own personal work and yoga teacher teaching people in a room. So it's acknowledging that we don't know what people bring with them in the room. When you go in to teach a class, you don't know what is presented before you. So how do you address these issues? So, I guess that's part 2, next book.
And I think as you all are talking about these older women who didn't have access to fruit and vegetables, what keeps flashing in my mind is my grandmother. And she would never say that she meditated. If you asked her, she was like, I don't know anything about that. I don't know that. But I do know that she was in the church choir. She would go early and just sit in the quiet church. I'm assuming she was praying. I'm assuming she was talking to God about whatever she was going through. But just the image of her doing that is like, to me, that was meditation. That was her time of alone time. She's not out in a park. She's not in the ocean. She's in church waiting for everybody to come, but stealing a couple minutes to herself of quiet to just kind of center and connect. But we wouldn't call that meditation. She wouldn't call that meditation. But how do you explain that it's stuff that we do inherently? It's just what we're calling it that's making it different, but we are doing those things.
Yeah, that is, and that's the key to the cultural competencies of what we're presenting in our book, is to look, what is the definition of meditation? What is the definition of yoga? What's the definition of a contemplative practice? What's the definition of self-study? When you dig into the nuances of those meanings, then you can explore the different ways that we do those particular things, so that it becomes more accessible. Not only that, particularly as a Black yoga practitioner or Black yoga teacher, when we're trying to offer a healing practice in our community, we need to meet our community where they're at. And so walking into a community and using terminology that is foreign is not going to be accessible.
Right.
So it is about, how do you observe, like you said, I'm observing my grandmother and what she's doing and seeing the peace that she's achieving
Mhm.
for being quiet and silent in the church, which are basic tenets of what it means to sit in meditation, so that you don't have to say meditation, but you can then now embrace that for her. So maybe if your grandmother, I'm just using it as an example, has that quiet time at one day a week, and then you recognize she's frazzled throughout the week, you can say, Grandma, remember when you did that? Is there a way now that you can take more time during the week in home or whatever to find that same time, so that you now have that language
Yeah.
and experience that you can tease and coax for her.
I like that, Charlene.
Mm-hmm.
So I had sent some questions earlier that I was curious about. We just have all off on another tangent, so I'm gonna come back to some of the questions because I thought they would be relevant to talk about. So I'm calling it a book tour. Do you guys consider it signing, or like you've done several? So are we officially touring now?
I guess you could say it. We've been in multiple states, so that's a tour, right?
Yeah.
And where are you? I've been to the library, and I know you've been to yoga studios. What are the venues in the community that you're doing? I know you did Hyattsville, Poets and
Poets, busboy and
yeah.
poets. Mm-hmm.
So where are you meeting people in the community? Where are you finding, what are the locations you're finding that people in the community are willing to come to meet to talk about the book?
I would say that well, no, I won't say that. So we have spoken to a yoga communities. We've spoken to various people from the Black community. We've done a webinar with the Veterans Administration. It was a yoga group, so practitioners and teachers. I would say our most recent endeavor was with some women writers, which was really interesting. So a different perspective there. There's a community that we haven't gotten to speak to yet, or at least that I haven't, that I am still eager to talk with. And that is a church community.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, I hope we'll get an opportunity to do that sometime. Because, one of the questions that you have for us was about resistance or backlash or anything.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think we've had any so far that I'm aware of. It's been very, very positive. And I'm not saying that a church community would be a community of backlash, but I do anticipate that there would be some deep and thoughtful, heavy questions that we haven't had an opportunity to address yet.
Mm.
Yeah, and the yoga teachers, it's been pretty much yoga. Well, I can't even say that. No, I think it has been yoga teachers who do bring up, how do I offer this to my Christian community? I think we've had that question at every event, almost. Excuse me.
And what do you say, Marilyn? I give Charlene time. When someone says, "How do we offer this to our Christian community?" What is your response?
Well, a couple of approaches are, well, first, being very respectful, acknowledging the community, and going to that part of the book where you brought up earlier about the chart and the similarities. And even to your example about, observing your grandmother, uh, a couple of people have brought up questions about, how do we get this in school? How do we get this to the children? Because that's where it needs to start. But, maybe looking at that link between observing what goes on around us. We talk about a study that was done that showed that in our community, prayer is the #1 complementary approach to health.
Mm-hmm.
And as you've already talked about, Kimberly and Charlene, that prayer is meditation. It is calming the mind. And so it's just acknowledging and recognizing that some of our practices in our community are in line with the philosophical practices associated with yoga. and that is not a religion. So that's the first part of it, is being able to make that distinction.
When you said children, I remember being at the Howard County um, library, and Jana was there serving as a participant, just a random participant in the audience. But she did finally offer that this focus on teaching children is limited if you're not also teaching the parents, so that when these children come home, these same concepts are being welcomed within their home. And I thought that was deep. I had never thought about that. It's just kind of, you teach a child to do these things in school or wherever, but if it's not supported or modeled at home, does it really stick? Never thought of it. But it is an interesting concept that it
Well, I would say in my experience is that the children take it home to the parents. Yeah, there was a wonderful, there was a wonderful viral video reel that went around about this young boy who was climbing on furniture, and his mother was going to discipline him. Black woman, of course, she was going to give him a spanking, and he was negotiating himself out of the spanking. And he was negotiating himself out of the spanking, getting his mom to do pranayama. Mom, just take a deep breath and let it go. The beautiful thing about the video is that it worked. His mom did not discipline him, you know. And so I thought that that was a wonderful example of how this child learned a concept of pranayama, yoga in his school or whatever, and then said, oh no, I know how to use this in another setting. So I think that children, I have seen it too. Like I have done nutrition workshops with preschoolers. And so we had the teacher do a like experience with his children in class while I was meeting with the parents on a topic of nutrition. And then we would bring the children and the parents together to break bread. And the children would get the concept. Parents had their nose up about trying to have a veggie burger, but the children were not at all. And so I could see the influence that children can have on their parents. So I agree with Jen in the sense that it has to be reinforced. I also know though that that we can influence children enough to then bring it home. And these children today are so bright. It's amazing to me. Yeah.
You did answer my question about backlash, but I'm wondering if there have been any questions that completely caught you off guard. Like it was in the book, you knew it was in the book, but the way the person interpreted it or the question that they asked, you're like, whoa, okay.
I can't think of any like that, although I think at the Black Yoga Teachers Alliance conference, what I heard a lot, not a lot, but what we got many comments is folks who have seen a concept of what's in the book and are about to take it and run and dig deeper with it, which is exactly what we wanted to happen. So, you know, they're looking at this as a primer and they're like, we love that you had this concept and now I'm going to write a book, paper, whatever, and take it deeper. And that's exactly, you know, what I wanted to happen. So I can't think of anything.
Well, and to go to that point, that was a very deliberate decision because we have a large section on just references. Mm-hmm. And we actually even state, this is a place to start. Mm-hmm. Here are some sources, some resources that you could take a look at, but also acknowledge that this is not a comprehensive list. So, you know, be creative and go out and take a look and search for that information that you're looking for.
That kind of feeds into another one of my questions. I didn't go to the conference, but I was seeing, you know, on social media, different things. And Dr. Gail Parker was there. And her book came out a couple years ago. I pulled it so I could tell her whole title, Restorative Yoga for Ethnic and Race-Based Stress and Trauma. So that was the first book I was aware of that was talking about race-based stress and trauma. And then last year, I think it was Stephanie, you told me about the Black Women's Yoga History by Stephanie Evans.
Mm-hmm.
And so reading that book and then reading your book, how do you feel that all of these books are coming together? Are they like each book is the next step in the story? Each book is a missing piece of the story. Like, how do you see all of this new information coming out, being used, being digested and put together?
Well, again, I think it's now setting a stage for just from a yoga teacher training perspective, that within the yoga teacher training venue, where we can have a level of cultural competencies, when you have yoga teachers who are interested in serving the Black community. So to be able to have a voice there and not try to layer over a lineage or philosophy that feels put upon sometimes, so we can sit and have this disconnect or have an intellectual conversation around yoga philosophy over here and not really see how it's aligned with my community. So what I see with Stephanie Evans' book, which I think is brilliant, because her depiction, her historical depiction of how Black women have been in contemplative practice since enslavement is beautiful. And then what Dr. Gale offers is that she basically talked about the elephant in the room. Okay, we are traumatized because of institutional racism in this country. And here is a restorative contemplative practice that can absolutely support us in recalibrating our stress response. So I think it all sort of works together where we now see ourselves in the yoga practice. Marilyn? Yeah.
I think that each of these books brings a different perspective. I mean, we're all focused on the Black community, but our history is complex. Our healing is going to be complex, but yet there is this consistent, simple, and easy to access contemplative practice that we can use to help us get through it. So I really appreciate the depth of each one of these books and others that are out. And it's really amazing that I don't see necessarily a repetition of information. It's all new and different. And it's like that in itself is amazing. That we still are just scratching the surface of who we are, where we are, and how we move forward.
So that I think feeds into my question. Years ago, I don't even know when this clothing brand came out, but it was for us, by us, FUBU. And so I just really like that terminology, that this is what I describe as what's happening right now. So you two just came from the Black Yoga Teachers Alliance conference. Why do you think there's a need to have a Black Yoga Teachers Alliance? And why do you think there's a need for Black women, what I know about right now, to be writing these books about yoga in the Black community? Why couldn't someone else write these books? Why couldn't you join a regular yoga alliance, yoga teachers alliance? Why does it specifically have to be for Blacks?
This morning I had a thought. I had this thought. Maybe I remembered that I was going to be talking with you both today. But it was, how different would life have been for me or anybody else if you could be born and grow with no constraints, like to freely live your Perusia, whoever you are. And I think about the Black community, particularly here in the United States. We've not had that opportunity. There has been race. I mean, it's everywhere, and it's every day, and it's continuing. And so we have not had the opportunity to just flourish. And so I just thought about that, and it's like, wow, that would have been beautiful to just live and be who you are and not have to worry about these other issues. And as I think about that, we as women as well. So I think it's good that women are writing, because there's, as we know, there's been a long time in history where women have been repressed, depressed, held back, and yet carried the weight of your community, your family, the world on your shoulders. And so we're finally at a place where we can share our voices. I think about Phyllis Wheatley and the things that she did, which is just wonderful. And so I think that it's time. I'm so happy that the time is here. I'm so happy that there are so many women that are sharing their voices. And I am just struck by some of the thoughts that are coming forth. And I also go to a point that we bring up in the book, and Dr. Gail Parker mentioned this as others, but we as women have had to carry this weight, and we are going to muscle our way through it no matter what happens. You think about the instances where grandmothers have raised their children, are now raising their grandchildren, and so just continue to carry this weight, and it just continues to build and grow, and it affects us in so many ways. So I think it's extremely important for Black women. I mean, we've even had a period in history where we felt that we needed to protect our Black men because of the things that they were going through. So it's, I think it's extremely important for women to be at a place. But it's beautiful too that we had some Black men at that Black Yoga Teachers Alliance conference. And that in itself was wonderful. Like, everybody knew who they were.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I wanted to catch a word that you said before you go on. You said Purusha. Can you explain that a little bit?
It's like the nature of who you are. It's who you are. When we start to experience life, things change. As we're told, it's not good to do this in public. Little girls do this, little girls don't do that. Then it starts to affect who you are, and you're no longer living your true nature. You're living it through these other instances that have been piled on. So it's just your own true nature.
Mm-hmm. I learned about it through Ayurveda, more so than yoga. And I'm just like, oh, I've heard that word before. So I just want to make sure I caught it before we went on. Charlene, did you want to?
Oh, I just wanted to say one concept about community, and that as Black people, as enslaved Africans, we have always known that it is the sense of community that is our resilience. And I have, just in my lifetime, I had the great fortune of being a part of a very strong community in my childhood, and then watching how the sense of community got dispersed. And I believe we're coming back now as a community, as African Americans. We're coming back to the importance of community, and what the Black Yoga Teachers Alliance conference, or the alliance in of itself, that is the connection. And that if you ask any member, what did they get the most out of the conference or the alliance itself, it's always this sense of community. Yeah. It's this sense of family that we have. this conference, the level of respect, love, sharing, it was profound. We haven't been together in a while because of COVID. And so every workshop, every panel, every discussion ran over because the dialogue was so intense and brilliant, and the sharing. So not only from the presenters, but just who was in the room.
Right.
So I think it's that is what is valuable to us, is this sense of community and camaraderie and shared lived experience that we appreciate about one another, that we don't necessarily get in mixed company.
I think, and which goes back to the ability to be ourselves, to be who
Yes.
we are with no constraint. You just walk in the room and there's no pretension.
Mm-hmm.
You are who you are, and you know you'll be loved for who you are without question.
Yeah.
You know it when you walk in the room.
Absolutely.
Like
Charlene,
you feel it.
Mm-hmm.
you said community, and whatever you feel comfortable sharing, because I think your community upbringing was amazing. We're all saying community in different ways, and it means different things.
Mm-hmm.
I grew up in a multi-generational family. I had my grandparents and my great-grandparents until I was in my 20s.
Mm-hmm.
And so every weekend, all of the offspring of Harry and Minnie Jackson were together. And so that was my sense of community in a predominantly white county.
Mm-hmm.
Very small Black community, one church, and everybody kind of hung together around anything. And so that, to me, when I say community, that's what I mean, my large extended family and then the community around us.
Mm-hmm.
Charlene, can you explain, when you say you come from a community, what are you referring to?
Yeah, so I grew up in New York City, Staten Island, New York in particular, and on Staten Island, New York, in the what we call the North Shore, which is where predominantly Black folks lived, on the North Shore. And at the time when I was growing up, there were probably 10 to 15 prominent Black families that we knew of, right? And every community that we lived in was a village. So you had Manus Harbor was a village, West Brighton was a village, New Brighton was a village, Stapleton was a village. So there were these villages. So that meant, so I'm in West Brighton, in my village where we grew up, which was a housing project, you knew everybody. And so that meant that if I was hungry and there was nothing in my house, I could run across the street to such and such's house and get something to eat or drink. That's how close we were as a community. And all the adults knew all the children. I could be disciplined by any one of those adults, okay, and needed to listen. And if not, and they got back, then I was in trouble down the line, okay? So that's the kind of community that I'm talking about. So it wasn't just familiar, meaning my biological family. It was this whole community of people that were there. And not only that, everything was shared. Food was shared, conversation was shared, the care of the children was shared, shoveling the snow was shared, music was shared, spirituality was all shared.
Through the church, education was shared, or if
Everything.
somebody couldn't pay for a funeral, there was a collection and that was shared. And so
Everything was shared.
Right. Marilyn, I don't know your story. What community did you grow up in?
I am not from the East Coast, so really different. I'm from Texas. My parents, well, actually, okay, so my dad's part of the family, his family was from East Texas, so a heavy Black community there. But his parents migrated north, so I'm from West Texas. It's not actually in the West, but we call it West Texas. It's kind of in the Panhandle. So it's the arid, flat desert part of Texas. Very few Black people in that part of Texas. My mother, her father was raised on a reservation in Oklahoma. So they kind of met here in the middle. So I I come from a very small family in West Texas, but each individual family was large. But because we were geographically separated from them, it was just my very small nuclear family. But my parents were educators, so they were both teachers. And at that time, all of the Black people lived on one side of town. But we were the village. Like there was nobody else to depend on. So we all depended upon each other. And it was the same story. If I did anything wrong in school, any adult knew that they needed to take care of me, make sure that I was not going off the rails, which I had a tendency to do sometimes. And by the time I got home, my parents knew about it. And so it was everybody taking care of each other. Even separated, we were in the midst of a really white conservative community.
Coming out because we are a complex people and we all have different stories. And I think just us sharing about what we mean when we say community, there's so many similarities, no matter what part of the country you grow up in, there's certain things that we all experience. And then there's things that are different depending on the community surrounding us. So I'm glad we were able to share a little bit about our own backgrounds.
I think sometimes we forget, that love is the crux of the community. And when you're traumatized, you get suspect about that word or that concept. And I would like us to really get back to that when we say what is innate in our nature, what's innate in our nature is that unconditional love that we have for the community, in and of itself. And I think that's where we're slowly trying to walk our way back to. But it's hard when you've been traumatized, and the trust has been broken. Yeah.
We've gotten through my questions.
Okay.
Is there anything else that we didn't cover that you want to, have out there and to say as part of, we're supposed to be talking about the book. We've gone all over the place. And it's just kind of like, in terms of the book, is there something that you haven't had a chance to say anywhere else that you'd like to put out into the world?
I am looking forward to having some more difficult conversations in communities that we haven't been able to reach yet. And I just think that time is coming. Very appreciative of the fact that we've been able to speak to very different bodies, yoga teachers, yoga practitioners, parents who are just interested, people who have questions, those that are helping others. So yeah, I'm open to the next conversation.
Yeah, and even though it may sound like we've been all over the place in this conversation, this is the book. Because that's the whole idea. I mean, when we think about what is a yoga practice, it's a way of life, and it's an intentional way of life that practices certain principles and practices can really help to shape a more quality of life for individuals and for communities. And that ultimately, I hope, is the goal of what we wrote and where we're going with the work.
And I'm looking forward to also, in a teacher situation, to be able to talk about, now that we've got this understanding, this common understanding, at least what was presented in the book, how do we present that as yoga teachers to a room of people who are coming to us for whatever they're coming to us for? So how do we now put it into action? So hopefully we'll have that opportunity as well.
I'm sorry, I'm not following you for some reason. Can you say that again?
Sure. So we've talked about an individual self-study. So how do I sit with myself and discover these things? So now that the teacher is able to do that, how are they able to transfer that same situation to students that are in their class?
Gotcha. Wow. When you were saying it, I was thinking Charlene and I get together once a month to talk to another yogini. We've been doing it for all through COVID now. And she recommended a workbook. Is that what she was saying, Charlene? That along with this book, what did you take from that? And does that address what Marilyn was just saying, like how to help a yoga teacher teach this to a class?
Yeah, I mean, there has to be a practical application portion of the work. I mean, we have some practical applications there. However, concepts are wonderful as that's the beginning of knowledge. So the beginning of knowledge is to have a comprehensive knowledge of certain concepts. And then real comprehension happens when there's practical application. How do you apply the concepts that you're doing? So at the Black Yoga Teachers Alliance conference, Marilyn and I did facilitate a workshop and began to explore ways to use these concepts in that way. Of course, we ran out of time. But yet I believe that we at least got the beginning of what that might look like. And so it could be in a form of a workbook for sure, where we are articulating different ways to apply the concepts in the book.
I don't want to put more on your plate, but I'm just kind of like, yeah, do it. And I also think a workshop. Because this isn't taught in yoga teacher training, I just think, and not that you have to go to every teacher training in the world, but just kind of like, this is a piece that you could teach, that you could offer, that's not going to be a normal part of the curriculum, but that is so needed. And how to offer it as a course, a workshop, I don't know what it would be, but that there's something that if someone wants extra study specifically in this cultural competency, that they could come to, I'm saying you too, you can teach other people, you don't have to do it all, that they could come and get this information in that place.
Yep.
Yeah. Speaking of the workshop that Charlene just described, one of the practices that we did was a breathing practice. But the breathing practice was your natural breath. So normally, as a new yoga teacher, you've learned new practices and you're eager and you want to just go out and do all these new practices. But bringing it back to the basics, or at least starting there, I think is worthy of effort, to particularly if you want to reach people who might not come to a yoga studio. That is worth the time sometimes to take a step back and to assess what is the natural, whether it be breath or movement or thought or recognizing emotions. So hopefully we'll be able to do that in some way.
And the meditation, I sat in on the meditation that you did, Marilyn, and you announced it. We're going to do a meditation. Everybody settle into a seat. And part of me is like, oh, another meditation, right? So close your eyes. You got it. But the way you offered it and the wording, I think that meditation is in the book, was beautiful. And the energy in the room, like I'm sure the energy in the room is what was carrying the whole thing, but it was just kind of like, oh, I would listen to that meditation on a recording if you ever think to do it, no pressure. But it was just kind of like, oh, I needed that day. And so I hope as you're doing workshops and you're offering different things, don't negate the power of what you're offering, even while you're talking, or even, the demos that you're doing. Just, I think more people could use them than just the people in your audience, is what I'm trying to say.
Yeah, well, I know Marilyn and I haven't had a chance to debrief the conference, but was it the next day? Was it the next day or later on that the next session that happened, all of it was referring back to our workshop. All of it. And so, she and I were doing it. We were like, oh, really?
Might have something here.
Yeah, it was pretty powerful, the impact, because it just rippled through the rest of the conference, where there was a referral back to our workshop and the experiences that people had during that. So
very
I hear you.
work.
Yeah.
Well, thank you both for giving me your time and let me
Thank
ask some more
you.
questions.
Thank you so
Great
much.
questions. Yeah, I enjoyed it.
Yes, thank you so much.
Thank you.
We stop the recording here.